Hey everybody, Trevor Sikkema here with the PFF NFL show to talk about the latest head coaching move in the NFL. This time it is the Carolina Panthers moving on from their head coach, Frank Reich. Panthers, not a great season. I don't think it's any sort of surprise to anybody to hear that. They're 1-10 on the year. Frank Reich gets fired after just 11 games, which makes it the third year in a row, which we have seen a team fire their head coach in the first year of their contract. It was Urban Meyer 3 years ago. Then it was Nathaniel Hackett last year. Now we have Frank Reich. Funny enough, Reich, the least amount of games of all of those guys. Who talked about what a crazy disaster it was with Urban Meyer in Jacksonville and how it was not going well with Nathaniel Hackett last year with the Broncos. And Reich got less games than both of those guys. They just 11 games and when he's moving on here. And it's not a good track record here for owner David Tepper, who will now be hiring his sixth head coach, interims included, since he took over the team in 2018. That is not the type of continuity that you want. And interesting enough, Chris Tabor, their special teams coordinator, who's been a special teams coordinator in the NFL since 2008, he'll be taking over at head coach, but that means that their defensive coordinator, Ejiro Evero, not the interim head coach. And that was the same situation last year. Had a really good defense with the Denver Broncos, and people thought that him being an up-and-coming young head coach candidate may have taken over as the interim, but kind of learned that he maybe looked at that situation in Denver last year, did not want to have his name associated with where that roster was going for the rest of the season, maybe tarnish a future head coaching gig. Seems like that might have been the case also here in Carolina. So not a good sign there. Like, it's just not going well with Carolina. I think it starts with how Bryce Young is playing, right? And you got to talk about the rest of the roster too, because roster build is the key reason why this Carolina Panthers team is failing right now. Yes, Frank Reich has not been perfect, and we'll get to that in a second, but how this team has been constructed and the roster, where they're currently at, I mean, it's one of the least talented rosters, especially offense. Defense, they got a lot of really nice pieces, but on offense, this is one of the worst and least talented offenses in the NFL. There's no doubt about it. And when you put a young quarterback like Bryce Young into that situation, he is somebody who, not breaking any news here, was not going to dominate the game physically. He was always going to be someone who is going to need to take time. What we loved about him pre-draft is how he processed the game, how smart he was, how he adapted to pressure, all that kinds of stuff. But it's even becoming way too much right now in Carolina. I think we're seeing that from him. He's not playing well, and there's a lot of guys that are letting him down. There's no question about it. But what's worrisome with him is he doesn't even look like that same sort of decision maker, that confident quarterback that we saw at Alabama. And you are at a little bit of an early tipping point here with him that you do not want to ruin his confidence as a pro. So I think that taking that into account is going to be selling point number one of who is going to be the next head coach here in Carolina, because Bryce, it hasn't been great with him, but just overall, the offensive numbers have been terrible. I mean, they're 29th in the NFL in total TD percentage. They're 31st in the NFL in total touchdowns. They've got the least amount of explosive plays, just 46 of any team in this league, giving up some of the most pressures with 187 total pressures already given up. And that's just, I think, speaks to the overall offensive talent or lack thereof that is in Carolina right now. But getting back to Reich and why I think that it's unfair to fire a guy in his first year, especially when he didn't have his hand on enough of the roster, it seems like. But it's hard to fire him in his first year. There are some reasons to say it was not going in that right direction. For as much as they didn't have a lot of talent on offense, you can mitigate some of that with where the game is going. We've seen this all around the league. Play action, motion rate, pre-snap, like those things really help out offenses that may be devoid of talent. They just can't straight up win one-on-one. It really helps some of those teams out. And for Carolina, they weren't utilizing those things. They're bottom 5 in the NFL in play action rate and in motion rate. And it's just, I think because of that, you see numbers like them being worst in the NFL in total yards after catch. Of course, talent goes into that as well, but scheme does too, right? You got to get these guys open. You got to be able to scheme them open, hit them in rhythm, allow them to get those yards after the catch. And it just didn't seem like, whether it was from play design or pre-snap thought process, whatever it was, they are making things really difficult. So it's not a good roster. Reich certainly was not making it easier on himself when it came to evaluating this offense. And I think it being so stagnant and it being tough to watch every week is why you come to this very quick decision to get rid of him before he even coaches an entire season, one season here with this team. Now, what about who's next? I don't think that Chris Tabor is going to get this head coach job after this season, with him being a special teams coordinator throughout his entire career in the NFL. I just don't think that that's going to happen. So where my mind goes first It's going to be all about Bryce Young and Bill O'Brien, who was a head coach in this league, won divisions, got to the playoffs in this league, is the New England Patriots offensive coordinator right now. And things aren't going well in New England either. So I think he could be available to be moved. And the key part here is that he was Bryce Young's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach when he was at Alabama for the 2 years that he was starting. So if you want to talk about somebody who knows Bryce Young really well, especially when he's playing at that high of a level, Bill O'Brien is one of those guys. Of course, there's a more seasoned head coach, a guy like Dan Quinn, who has made it to a Super Bowl before. He put together some really great teams for a handful of years there with the Atlanta Falcons. Or you could go with one of these up-and-coming young offensive coordinators as well. Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator, got a lot of looks. Bobby Slovic, the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans, is a hot name right now. So those are some of the first ones that kind of are thrown out that I think make sense for different reasons for Carolina. But just overall, the team really needs to build this roster a lot better. And it's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow because, of course, they do not have their first round pick this year. And it looks like that's going to be the number one overall selection. So not picking in the first round, not picking until the very beginning of the second round. They do have their second and third round picks. It's going to be key for them to get two positions, if you ask me. Something along the offensive line. You have to get another potential starter along the offensive line. And when I say potential, I mean this player has to be a starter. Maybe not year one, because asking a second or third round pick to be a year one starter is sometimes a tall task. So eventually you have to get one new starter on the offensive line with one of those first two picks. And then you got to give a difference maker in the passing game. That's an elite tight end, or probably more likely an elite wide receiver. And thankfully, this class is pretty stacked at wide receiver. You're going to have a lot of wide receiver options. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, Adonai Mitchell from Texas, Xavier Worthy from Texas, Xavier Legette from South Carolina. I think that there's going to be a lot of options for the Carolina Panthers when it comes to wide receiver in either the top of the second or the top of the third round. But no question about it, Carolina had to make a change. I don't think this is probably going to be the last change that they make before we get to the free agency period, the draft, the league new year, because they need a lot of different things in Carolina right now. But the most important part is you've got to build this team the right way. You've got to get the right minds in the building, and Tepper's got to be able to trust them. I think that it has been a total organizational failure for the Carolina Panthers over the last couple of seasons, and that has to stop this season. It starts with really hiring the guy that you believe in to probably be a new general manager instead of Scott Fitterer, because I think he could be on his way out as well. Get the top down right. And I think that if that's the case, in a couple of years, you can really start competing at a high level again.